Hello, and welcome to our March 2024 episode of the Living the Wheel of the Year series on the Stop, Breathe, Feel, Create podcast. I'm your host, Lauren G. Koch, and these are short monthly episodes where I will share a brief forecast of the moon cycles, prompts for deepening your connection to intuition and self while finding magic in the mundane. You'll also find information on any special dates such as equinoxes, solstice celebrations, all that will help deepen your connection further to the rhythms of nature, following the wheel of the year, of course, and along with suggestions for magical correspondences that you can add into your practice to deepen and amplify intentions throughout the month. So, I'll be completely honest. This March episode has been a killer one to try to plan, and it's actually been quite a struggle. I think part of it was I was sick in February, and I honestly don't feel very comfortable talking about Ostara um, or Easter for that matter. I do love spring, but for some reason, as I have been building out my curriculum with the cyclical living and stuff like that, there's always a sticky bit right around spring. And so I've been trying to unpack it. And I would love to hear what y'all are thinking of the Living the Wheel of the Year series and how I can better formulate it to assist y'all or bring y'all into a stronger connection with yourself as well as everything that's going on. And I wanted to talk about the reason why I do think that it's important to provide some astrological unpacks and stuff like that because it's very easy to get stuck in skepticism or like going full in believing some of these things. And I do want to sort of explain why I connect to astrology as well as why we should practice some healthy skepticism around it. And I was actually told by one of my students on this past Sunday about a book called 10% Happier by Dan Harris. And I've also been reading Soul Boom by Rainn Wilson also. And they talk a lot about how they were skeptical about certain things around religion or spiritualism. And I believe Dan Harris really unpacks how meditation and everything has helped him. So there's a lot of people out there talking about skepticism of some of these pseudosciences that we're practicing. But to me, and I think some of the greater realm of people that are practicing these, we understand that it's more than just a placebo effect. And is, you know, to me, it it doesn't really have to have that scientific backing. The definition of a pseudoscience is what is consisted of statements, beliefs, or practices that claim to be both scientific and factual without any scientific backing. But there are some major research that's starting to happen in areas of sound therapy, Reiki, the meridians from Chinese medicine, and the like. So there are things that are popping up that are actually sharing that some of this stuff is actually quite meaningful. And, honestly, to each their own. If you like it, if you enjoy it, if you find benefit from it, who is that hurting, right? Live and let live, in my opinion. And we might get a little bit more into that because this has been a difficult time. And I think that that is part of why I've been struggling with this episode because there's so much going on in the world around us. And as a highly empathetic person and just a spiritual being in general, our planet is crying. It is literally weeping because of everything that is going on. And it's really hard for me to stay in a higher vibration. so that I can channel episodes like this and provide a beacon of hope in all of this darkness. And I don't think that a lot of people are talking about that per se. And for me, my approach, instead of necessarily like diving in and telling you all of my political beliefs or religious beliefs or whatever, I try to provide support around you navigating making your own decisions. And I want to emphasize that through all of this, no person is any better or worse than the next. So Irene Glass posted something the other day about how everyone is their main character in their story. And I see this happen a lot in day to day life, especially when I actually get outside the house. And shoot, we live on a busy road and there's constant horns blaring, there's constant fire trucks and ambulances and stuff going past. And it's a constant reminder of how much in a hurry people are. Or they're so absorbed in their phone or whatever is going on that they don't consider the rest of the world around them. And I see this so much when I'm on the road, or in stores or whatever, is a lot of people do not treat other human beings as being important. And if you're familiar with gameplay at all, you'll know the difference between a MC, the main character, and an NPC. And an NPC is a non-player character. And what these do, if you're used to Baldur's Gate or Skyrim or any numerous amounts of games out there, I'm not that savvy, but this is what I've picked up over the years with my partner and other people that play more games than I do, is that non-player character, they do not move from their space. Sometimes they might have a little circuit or something that they walk across, but typically when you leave their shop, they just kind of go on pause or stop or whatever, like they disappear. But there's so many people out there treating other people like they are NPCs and that we can only have main character energy. We've got to find balance, y'all. And within everything that's going on in this world, it's even more evident that that is a major issue because regardless of if it's religious based, if it's political based, whatever, people just aren't recognizing that every person gets up in the morning, puts their clothes on, puts their shoes on, and they probably eat breakfast. I don't know, drink coffee, whatever. We're all the same. We all bleed the same. If we're not practicing equality for all living beings, we're messing up. And you the same thing, with religion, this is why I tend to be more on the spiritual side, is because religion seems to be about creating separation, about creating judgment for those that don't practice the same as you. It's all based upon devaluing another human life. And I know you probably didn't hop on here to be preached at this morning or whenever you're tuning in, but if you don't get anything else from this episode, I hope that you leave with a greater sense of compassion and caring and just general kindness moving forward. Because it does not matter someone's background. It does not matter what gender they identify as. It does not matter the color of their skin, the language that they speak. They are still people. And we too often forget that. I think that we could avoid a lot of issues if we just remember that there's someone on the other side. And I know that there's a lot of issues in this world, from global warming to wars to oppression to so many things that we could get bogged down in. And like I said, I don't try to project that a lot. I don't try to put that at the forefront because I feel like by teaching compassion, teaching love, teaching being from the heart center, and finding balance between self care and working for the collective, which means this whole entire planet, this whole entire universe, we will be in a better place. So that's probably why you won't hear me like specifically projecting certain things, but just know that yes, I am here to help and support you through that and to provide space. It's just really hard for me to always have the words in the moment that it's happening because as an empathetic person, I'm feeling all the world's pain. I get very, very depressed sometimes when all these things are happening. And it's hard for me to be able to speak in an educated or um, spirit led way about some of these topics because it's just taken me a longer time to process them and hold space for those because they're so big. And as this happens, from spirit, from the divine, I just keep getting the message: preach peace, preach equality, preach balance, preach compassion and caring. And so that's what I'm doing. Anyway, okay, off my soapbox. We're going to get back to astrology and all of the other stuff. So we were talking about pseudosciences, right? And one of the reasons why I keep coming back to astrology is that for some reason, there is something that happens in the cosmos that is undefined. When I start not having time to honor or sort of keep track of everything that's going on in the cosmos, and usually I'm just following moon cycles and stuff like that, I start feeling a lot more hectic, if that makes sense. Things just seem unexplained, whether it's stress, whether it's, issues within relationships, whatever. And then you check in with what's going on, and it's like, okay, there's all this stuff happening that's beyond my control and everything. And I want to give you a quote by Laura Andrikopoulos, I believe. I'm not great at pronouncing Greek or Mediterranean names, so please forgive me. But Laura is a lecturer of cultural astronomy and astrology at the University of Wales Trinity in Saint David. So, what Laura said was astrology has been practiced ever since civilization records began. Trying to understand that practice, we don't assume that it's true or false. We're more looking at what humans are doing and what meaning they're getting. And I really, really like that because it is true. astrology has been a huge part of civilization from when it started. Um, it's, you know, they even talk about it in the story of the three wise men coming from, the Far East to Bethlehem and stuff like that. Like, there's records of this being used for millennia. And I mean, for great reason, because, we're about to enter the eclipse season and stuff like that. And this could be a very drastic thing for people that didn't have any way of predicting these shifts. And wherever you are on the earth is going to affect whether you're viewing or seeing this very prominently. So, it just like with here, we're not going to be in mid Maryland, we're not going to be in the full path of the solar eclipse in April. We would have to go to like Ohio, Erie, Pennsylvania area, Vermont, something like that to see the full solar eclipse. Unfortunately, I have a doctor's appointment that day, so I'm not going to be able to make that trip. But anyway, I do highly dislike when people make their zodiac sign their whole personality. Um, I mean, I do believe that there's some really odd coincidences that happen when you start looking at your birth chart and stuff like that, but I feel like sometimes people use it as an excuse to have toxic traits. Okay? I also know that as a Pisces, with Pisces being in my main top 3 houses, my sun, my rising, and my moon, things are cray cray sometimes. Um, but I am like half water, half earth energy, and I have a spattering of air and fire in there. I think like just one or two. And so it's like I oscillate between going with the flow, having all of these strong emotions, and then being kind of ground. I say kind of because grounding is something that's very hard for me. And I think that sometimes for more spiritual people, that can be the case because we tend to, get high in our crown chakra, our third eye is very open and stuff. And so we don't necessarily remember to ground ourselves because we enjoy that energy. But everything needs to be rooted. Everything needs to be grounded. And you'll hear about this during my conversation with Ricky from Reiki by Ricky in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in the upcoming next episode. And she really explained it very well, especially in correlation with manifestation. And it was something that I had never heard or considered in that, where we need to make sure that not only are we doing all the things that we need to spiritually to get the ball rolling, putting the thing out into the universe, but we also need to do the physical work. And part of that physical work of getting the ball rolling is taking and grounding ourselves and making sure that everything's in our root, everything's in our heart, everything's in our spirit, that mind, body, soul balance, y'all. So, anyway, going off on another tangent, but this is why I find it kind of if like important that we observe some of the things, whether we fully absorb or hold on to their principles and stuff like that, right? Because for me, astrology serves as a tool to better know yourself and to learn how to practice cyclical living. And for me, cyclical living has really essentially helped me move out of active burnout. I would say that my burnout recovery is still very much in process. Before we fully jump into this conversation, I just want to provide a little clarifier. This is a very friendly space. This is meant to be a safe space for all. And if at any point something that I talk about from a biological standpoint or something like that doesn't ring true, or you've had a different experience, feel free to reach out and let me know how you're feeling, what you've experienced, other things to look at, because I'm still researching and learning myself, um, especially from like transgender, gender fluid, um, the queer, non-binary community, as well as pagan spiritual slash BIPOC, whatever. I want this to be an extremely safe space for all, so that people are made to feel very welcome and supported in this space. I provide holistic care, and I'm trying to educate myself so that I can provide ample support for those who are deciding to transition, because there's so much to be gained from working with Reiki and sound healing and stuff in those areas. So just wanted to do a quick little disclaimer, because I don't think that there's anything wrong with what I said, but it's coming from a place of not fully understanding certain language. So like I said, please correct me if I'm wrong, or send me resources to better educate myself, because we're all learning together. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of the episode. But cyclical living has been the basis of where I've grounded everything. It first started with connecting my menstrual cycle. And yes, we're going to talk about that. So if you're icky about it, you know, whatever, because this is a natural thing. And we're like, so many girls, if you're born female, and even if, we are not given the education that we need to work within the body that we're given. And there's so little research that's done on this stage of life. And they, whether it's pregnancy, whether it's the menstrual cycle and the PCOS and stuff like that, one of the biggest excuses that they're using is that every person, every female born body fluctuates so vastly that they can't do the research around it. They can't find level ground. Well, treat each person individually. Welcome to holistic wellness, y'all. Integrative well-being. This is where we need to go, because from what I've experienced, and here we go on another tangent, because of what happens in our body and the way that we have, especially in our modern society here in the US, I can't speak for everywhere, but this hustle culture that we found ourselves in takes, and especially those, females trying to break the glass ceiling during the 80s and throughout the 90s and stuff. We thought that we had to become men or male identifying beings, basically, to keep up. And the 9 to 5, for many people, and I would say this is both male and female born individuals, especially being neurodivergent, our cortisol levels and dopamine and everything release at a totally different time of day and evening. So it really affects how our bodies react and are able to show up each day. And we get labeled as lazy, we get labeled as all kinds of things. I'm not even going to go down that path right now. But as female born humans, we have to acknowledge that we're biologically different. And that means that we have a 28-ish, like I said, every person is different. We have a 28-day-ish cycle, whereas our male counterparts who are born male at birth tend to have a 24-hour cycle to reset. And so our as female born humans, our bodies tend to fluctuate on a different cycle. So what cyclical living has helped us do, and I say us because there's this whole movement out there, and I've been working on this, lining up my physical needs with the astrological movements since 2020, I think. Um, it helps us plan for ebb and flow. It allows us to space out big events and pace ourselves so we can cut back on the exhaustion and the painful downtime that happens when we don't practice self care, right? So, and it seems like, I won't even start trying to unpack the whole lived experience of the 80s and 90s. I grew up during that time. I saw it happen. And there was so much generational trauma, not only from the Great Depression and even prior to that, hello, the Civil War, some of the things that nobody wants to talk about. But there's so much that has built into the generational trauma. And then on top of that, especially during the 80s, the 90s, there's this guy on Instagram that I've been following. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's explaining that it seems like the millennials, I'm a mid-aged millennial, I fell kind of in the middle, that we're leading the pack on burnout. And not just burnout as being something that's happening within our nervous system and that we can rest and sleep and get rid of, but it's actually a mindset, a burnout mindset where we live off of stress and caffeine, basically. And I completely identify with this because our society has put emphasis on our worth being only as good as our ability to be productive. And if you're neurodivergent like me, you're already going to be wanting to be very active and have something that you're doing all the time because you get bored. It's really hard for me to just sit down and watch a show and enjoy being able to sit down because my brain's telling me you need to be working. This is your to-do list. This is your thing. And the reason why I think that that happens is because I'm not activated enough. I am not immersed enough inside of what is going on. And there's not enough to pique my interest. And so, they can talk about how, as neurodivergents, we collect hobbies, we have hyper focus, and then we move on. That's never really been the case with me. I've always been very hyper focused for long periods of time until I become very familiar with what I'm working with. And then I'll kind of move on, and then it comes back yet again in that cyclical movement. And I'm sure there'll be another tangent very soon about the creative cycle because, especially within the academic world, we're taught that creativity has to be constant. There's no time necessarily built in to have that ebb and flow, that observational period of time, the thinking and processing time, the rest time, as well as the production and the creation part of time. We have to allow our bodies to rest and process, or we're going to be living in burnout all the time, whether it's creative burnout, physical burnout, spiritual burnout. If we do not allow ourselves to rest, people, we will be continuing to live in the cycle of burnout over and over and over and over and over again. And it just keeps compounding upon our nervous system. And the more we perpetuate it, the more pain and dis-ease, disease that we, and I hate that whole whatever, that the disease as dis-ease. But there is some major elements that ring true with it because and I feel like the nervous system hasn't been properly observed, or maybe it's just our modern medical field is failing us as a society because they're doing band-aid fixes. I'm not going to go off on that tangent right now, um, because I want to get into the juicy bits. But as someone that has been in and out of the different medical doctors' offices my whole entire life, both for myself as well as for my family members, and just seeing how they're like pushed through like cattle, like we're a number, and that we're not actually an individual within this meat suit. Um, it's an issue. And we all know that that's part of why I went into integrative well being. But let's get back to cyclical living, and I'll get off my soapbox again. So, getting back to cyclical living, I want to express how crucial I've found it to be to take time to observe what patterns we see popping up in our lives. For me, over the past few years, I would notice that I would start reaching a critical capacity in late summer because of various reasons. I would often get in this like pushing through type mentality. And then fall and early winter would and have been very rough for me. This also happened throughout grad school, where I was finding myself ending up right toward the tail end of each semester on bed rest with severe dehydration and um 4 to 2 weeks before the end of the semester, right when you don't need that to happen. And part of that was that whole productive, if you're not grinding, if you're not constantly in the studio, if you're not being productive, you're not doing the thing. I know you can't see me, but I'm in here making hand gestures. But cyclical tracking was what really helped me get to the point where I was more in tune with my body and able to heal a lot of the pain flares that I was experiencing, or at least be able to plan for them. Because believe me, my pain is far from being gone as far as my lower back. I have scoliosis. One of my left leg is actually shorter by I think like 3/8 of an inch or something like that from my right leg. So it takes and cocks my hips. And even with risers and stuff like that, it doesn't really help. And a lot of it has to do with my nervous system has been in high alert for most of my life. Um, and I believe part of it was from generational trauma. But we can only really work with what is currently happening in our knowledge right now. And of course, bring in what we can from past lives or those other generational traumas, breaking those outdated mindsets and ways of doing things. But that's not the topic of this episode. I already expressed how the female born body experiences an inner cycle of like 28-ish days. And so sometimes this actually syncs up with the moon cycle. Um, Unfortunately, in our modern times, our exposure to artificial lights allow causes more fluctuation in this. Um, and by regulating our bodies more to not having screen time first thing in the morning, or sort of acknowledging that some of the things that we have in this modern time, that it doesn't necessarily aid us as well as we think it does. And so, like, by having no screen time right before bed and right as we wake up, or um taking and putting a dimmer, like you can take and adjust to create a light sensitive filter on your phone and stuff like that, that will help you regulate your cortisol levels and stuff like that, so you're not constantly being infiltrated by all of this light. And I've seen and heard from people that have actually experienced menopause and hysterectomies that they still experience this ebb and flow, this cycle within their bodies, even after they've passed through a certain age or, something like that. But what I want to emphasize, regardless of what your cycle looks like, whether you're a biologically born male or female, um, I want to make sure that you check out this really cool system, which has been here for millennium. That if we take and look at the ebb and flow, those natural rhythms of nature, how similar they are to the inner workings of our body. And it also, you know, it's repeated over and over again. We have a shorter segment during the day with the rising of the sun and the rising of the moon and the sunsets and the moon rises and all of that. We have that little segment within our 24-hour period of time. And then we move into the week, right? And then that's a reset. And then we have the month, and that's reset. And then we have the quarter system with the seasons shifting through. And there's so much value that we can take from just observing some of those natural cycles. And so now I'll break down a little bit of why that can really impact our bodies and how we can start using that to our benefit, even in our modern lives, even not being an agrarian culture, how we can take and shift some of those things that our agricultural ancestors would have used to direct their calendar, but take it into more inner work for ourselves. So, as we enter spring here in the Northern Hemisphere, we'll soon be experiencing Ostara, or the spring equinox, on March 19th, where we'll experience an equal amount of light and dark on both sides of the hemisphere. So that means the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere both have the same amount of light and dark at the same time. This means the sun, I believe, is directly above the equator, balanced. This is why, like, some of Stonehenge and some of the old ritual spaces and stuff in Ireland, they are lined up with the fall in spring equinoxes, so that, and I think some of them are with the solstices as well, so that the sun hits in a certain space only once or twice a year. It's pretty amazing. And it also gives us an indicator of how important this was to our ancestors, and that maybe we should pay attention to it a little bit. But anyway, as we start moving into the spring equinox, the days are lengthening. The weather is warming. The earth is starting to awaken. And if we look at the themes of Easter, if you're more familiar with this Christian holiday, you'll find that whether you're looking at pagan rituals or, other spiritual holidays the world over, you'll find similar themes about the practices that are used at this time of year, often connecting to fertility, new beginnings, rebirth, and even self discovery. So I highly suggest, like, if you've only been part of one practice, to expand yourself and start seeing why we do certain things. Because it hasn't always been one set way of doing something. And for me, and I think a lot of spiritual practitioners that do a lot of animistic or nature based studies, spring is specifically time, or it is specifically a time of personal growth and manifestation. If you've been hanging out with me in this space for a while, you'll remember me talking about how winter was a time of rest and preparation, cleaning and ridding ourselves of some of the things that weren't serving us so that we're readying ourselves to use all of that energy that has been building up inside of our bodies to do a thing. And in agrarian cultures, this would have been the time when we were preparing the fields for seeding and probably having some sort of germination happening in warmer protected areas of our homes or barns or whatever like that. But unless you're an avid gardener, which I'm totally not, I grew up in a rural area of Georgia and I assisted and watched my grandfather, my pawpaw, go through this process every year because he loved planting a huge garden. So I appreciate it. And I love playing in the dirt. I find it very fun. I find it very grounding. But I know that not every person gets to experience this. And it can be difficult if you've only experienced this modern hustle culture that you don't recognize these ebbs and flows. And that's totally okay. But understand that the energies, regardless of what we're now doing in our modern society, are still there. And there was a reason why it was there to begin with because of the agrarian cultures and how they followed the natural rhythms. So, spring is then followed by summer, where we start experiencing unabated growth, right? And some of the earlier crops start coming in, like strawberries, different berries, peaches, squashes, and all of that. But if we're looking at it in a more personal way, this is when some of the hard work that we've put in preparing throughout the winter, making sure that we're resting and all of that, and then getting the ball rolling during the spring to make some of these things happen, the active manifestation. This is when all of this stuff starts sort of coming to fruition and all the hard work starts paying off in our life. But just like a garden, if we don't take time to prune or weed our gardens, they can become very unruly. And as a chaos monster, believe me, I love unruly. But if we allow ourselves to go unchecked, just like a garden, it becomes unmanageable. So I highly recommend using, like, for me, July is when I experience this the most, when it's time to take assessment. And if you look at the wheel of the year or the seasons, it's directly across from, say, October, November, if we're looking at the 12-month series. Um, so that's also a time when we're taking assessment and releasing as well. So during July for me, whenever works for you, start taking some time to cultivate and prune some things. What's not working? What needs to be further implemented? What boundaries do I need to put in place, or what things that I need to discard? Then we'll start moving into autumn, where the harvest starts coming in. Everything has started coming to fruition at this point. You know, we have wheat coming in, we have the apple harvest, we have all kinds of gourd type plants and stuff. Tomatoes are going crazy. Like, this is the time that everything just like happens, right? And it's a time to celebrate and practice gratitude, which is what we're supposed to be practicing around the autumn equinox in September, typically around September 21st. But in our modern society, and you've probably heard me talk about it before, our calendar is off kilter from the agrarian calendar. So November is when the modern calendar has us celebrating and giving thanks and stuff like that, which is 2 months later than it really should be. And I get it. They were probably doing it because of bank holidays and something to do with capitalism, no doubt. But this is November is not. Let's just be honest, it's not when we were supposed to be celebrating that time period. Um, this is a time of preparation as well, especially as we move past the September 21st time period where the autumn equinox happens. That period of time between the autumn equinox and Samhain, or All Hallows Eve, Halloween, that period of time is a time of preparation when we're taking and canning and preserving and making sure that we are able to survive the colder months. And what does this mean if we're not in an agrarian culture, right? We're not we're no longer having to preserve crops to necessarily get by unless you're homesteading or something like that. We can walk to the store, and just grab whatever we need pretty much any time of year. But this is also causing issues within our bodies. I'm not going to hop on that soapbox. But we have moved into a very wasteful time in our society where we no longer have to worry about making it through, per se. And so allowing ourselves to shift and see what it is that we need to take care of in our own personal lives. That's why I love autumn for shadow work. Not only are we starting to move into the darker time of the year and stuff like that, supposed to be a slowing down time period. And we're preparing, we're doing a lot of things around the harvest, and then the later we get into autumn, the more time we have to take for being more insular or in hibernation or like turning inward. And throughout some of this time, especially in agrarian cultures, they would take time to honor the ancestors or what they experience loss around throughout the year. And you'll see that as being celebrated by most denominations of churches as All Saints' Day. In more pagan communities, this is Samhain or All Hallows Eve, that type of thing. And it's considered that the veil is thinning. In spring, they also believe that the veil is thinning around Beltane or May 1st, when you've got the midsummer or the mid-spring thing. You're moving into early summer type situation. But from what I'm studying and stuff like that, the veil doesn't necessarily actually thin. It may for other people that aren't so attuned to the spirit realm, but I totally agree that things get more activated during that period of time. So, the spirit world is all around us throughout the year. And for some of us, our personal veil, has been removed or it's thinner than others. So we're able to communicate and do things normally throughout the year. Whereas other people, that aren't as attuned or don't work with intuition as much, they only experience it during these very highly activated times. I'm sure there's some other people that can explain that on much better, um, in a much clearer manner and more concise, but just a little nugget, and we'll probably unpack that more later as we start traversing through those periods of time. But how can we apply this through our own personal life? And as we're celebrating during this fall period of time, and honoring the spirits of what we've lost, we can start moving through that shadow work that I mentioned previously and start creating a blank slate, basically, and clearing space so that you're able to receive the downloads from spirit during the winter and move more into your third eye and crown chakra. And making sure that you're taking time to get lots of rest, especially through January and February after the insanity of the holiday season. If you've read my blog or anything else, you've probably heard my rants about the holiday season and how, yes, there was a lot of celebration that happened during the winter season, but the way that capitalism has taken things over and blah, 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 you'll hear it again. But winter is a time for radical reset. Rest, people, rest. And as the winter cocoons us in a heavy blanket, it invites us to hibernate, turn inward, become more observant, make the repairs that you need to do. This was a time of mending and fixing things around the house, in agrarian cultures, like knitting new sweaters, new stockings, mending various things like the harnesses for the horses and stuff like that. So, how can we apply that to our modern life? And that's through taking time for that radical rest and reset so that we get ready to move into the busy season. And that's also why, just like if we watch how bears hibernate and stuff like that, we may experience a fluctuate in our weight during the winter as well because we're not able to go outside as much and stuff like that. And that was because not only from the harvest and from all the celebrations and stuff, our body was creating energy that was being held inside of us as fat to be burned off or whatever as we got toward the leaner months of the winter, but it was also providing fuel for us to burst into spring and start doing the hard work, right? So it's important to think about easing up honoring your body's fluctuations and taking time to rest. And the same cycle can be experienced on a monthly basis with the moon cycles. And it I'll try to show the correlations as I go through them. So let's start with the new moon or the dark moon. This is when the moon is not visible to us with the human eye. It hasn't went anywhere. It's still there. We know that. It's in orbit. This is like the late winter and early spring if we're correlating it to the seasonal calendar. And this is when we're taking time to prepare. We're planning and getting things ready to start manifesting. Then with the waxing of the crescent moon, we can really start getting the ball rolling. Like during the new moon, this is time where we do more of the spiritual work around the manifestation. We've become clear on our goals. We're putting it out to our spirit guides, the divine, the universe to take it, right? And then it's time for us to start actually doing the work. And so during the waxing crescent moon, we start getting the ball rolling with the act of manifestation, grounding it into our bodies, taking illuminated action toward the things that we want, planting, if you will, because this is the spring time of the moon cycle. And then we move into the first quarter. This is where we're kind of tested by our commitment of our previous goals. It's time to take stock of what's working, where we need to realign ourselves. And this is very similar to the early to midsummer phase where we're starting to, see the unabated growth and where we might need to start cultivating and pruning our gardens, right? Then we move into the waxing gibbous moon. And that is a time to coast a little bit. There's definitely still tons of work to be done, but everything is happening. Like the seeds have been planted, they're being nourished and all of that. All we need to do is make sure that they're taken care of and that they're still coming into fruition, that they're still being cultivated. And this is where we can start moving more into alignment with our manifestation. A lot of times we start with a very broad way of what we're, getting started. We plant lots of seeds. And then during that cultivation period, we need to start pulling out stuff that maybe isn't growing well enough. Maybe it got damaged because of a storm or something like that. So the waxing gibbous moon is where we kind of coast and we're only taking time to nurture and make sure everything's going well. Putting in more boundaries, if you will, yanking out weeds by the roots, etc. Then the full moon. Imagine this is that harvest season, that early autumn where we're experiencing that time of celebration as all of our hard work is starting to pay off. And we definitely see what still needs work. And some things may not have fully developed. Just allow them to stay in the field until they ripen up. Maybe they need another growing season. There's plenty of plants out there that only bloom like every 2 years, the biennials and stuff like that. So, observing what has turned out really well, what has come to fruition, and what maybe needs a little bit more help. And making sure that you're honoring and celebrating all of this. And this also means that it's a good time to release those things that we can't control, right? So if something didn't ripen fully during that period of time, allow yourself to release and be like, okay, this needs more time. We'll check in with it a little bit later. Then we move into the waning gibbous. This is when the moon starts to disappear again and start moving toward the dark moon. The waning gibbous is all about taking stock. We've had that harvest. What loose ends do we need to tie up and continue to release the things that we can't control? What do we need to honor during this time period? Just like we honor our ancestors during late fall and the things that we've lost, what do we need to take and work on or honor during this period of time of the moon? And then we enter the third quarter, and this is my favorite time to release, especially all the things that are no longer serving me in my life and honoring my journey up to this point, right? We've done that as the final preparations before resting. And this cycle is only like 3 or 4 days long between each of these sections of the moon. That's why I like to take and sort of give uh each part of the moon its own sort of identification. And there's many practitioners out there that have their own way of doing this. Just happens to be what has settled for me in my own personal cycle. And sometimes, especially if you're in a female identifying body that was born that way at birth, your actual cycle does not fully align with this. So you might be having two of these happening, and that's totally okay. Or if it seems like too much to follow the moon cycles and your own personal cycle, choose your personal cycle, because during the third quarter, this is really when our luteal phase kind of starts. We've moved into the fall, the hibernation, and this is probably when our menstrual cycle is getting started. Um, so again, third quarter is time to take final preparations before you rest. And I've heard people talk about how with the waning crescent and this third quarter, that it's time to check in on your abundance or maybe what you're lacking personally. And if you have an abundance of something, such as energy or money, give it away. And that's a beautiful way of doing that. Honestly, I don't often see where I have an abundance of energy or money most of the time. Um, it's often a time for me to give to myself because maybe you're finding that you're completely exhausted. And this is that winter period of time where you do give to yourself so that we can start the cycle all over again with the new moon and getting manifestation started, right? So, and occasionally, if you're doing your self care properly throughout the month, you will start to find that your cup is overflowing and that you have an abundance of energy and money and stuff like that. Go for it. Continue to give, but also remember to find that balance with personal self care, because so often, if I just barrel right on through my waning crescent period of time, that third quarter to the new moon period of time, I find myself entering the new phase exhausted and getting out of sync. So take that as you will. Long story short, that is why I teach working with the natural rhythms of the earth, the moon cycles especially, and infuse my offerings with astrological vibes, because regardless of what science says can be or cannot be proved, there's something to be found within these shifts that happen in the cosmos and within the seasons. And I can't explain it. I mean, by no means am I the best astrologer. In fact, I'd say I'm just a dabbler. There's so much wisdom to be found out there if we open ourselves to it. So, that being said, let's dive in. So, that being said, let's dive in to what's happening in the skies this March 2024. I might have mentioned a little bit about these shifts in the February edition of the Living the Wheel of the Year episode, but here's a recap because there's a lot that's going to be happening, especially during the new moon that starts on March 10th at 5 a.m., where we'll be experiencing the darkest point of the new moon at 20 degrees of Pisces. I highly recommend creating space for yourself this day specifically to be observant and go inward, to tap into your imagination and making sure that you find balance with a gentle grounding practice, as there might be a lot of downloads happening and coming in strong today on March 10th. Because at 10:06 a.m., Mercury will be conjoining with Neptune in Pisces. Ooh, Neptune and Pisces? Holy cow. Anyway. So, as mentioned, connecting to and with your senses, your intuition and creativity will serve you well on this day. And of course, anything to do with Mercury, you'll want to be paying attention to how you're communicating so that you can best speak clearly to avoid confusion. And that's just because Mercury kind of rules communication, technology, stuff like that. Later in the day at 8:03 p.m., the moon will enter the sign of Pisces, right? We're going to be highly receptive at this time. So do your best to prepare for your psychic radar to start going off the charts. I recommend maybe taking some time to do some journey work, maybe some hedge witchery, working with the ancestors or whatever. I think that this would be a good time and it would serve you well. It may just be time that you need to take to practice self care because, as highly empathetic and sensitive folks, we may feel a little fried today on March 10th. Because of all the energies that we're experiencing. And if you're not paying attention to what's going on around you, you could get confused about why you've been hit with this wave of exhaustion. So take it easy and hold yourself in compassion if you find that this has happened. Some correspondences that you may want to use on March 10th include the following. And as always, be smart. Use caution with herbs, essential oils, making sure that you're checking medical warnings, etc. And always, what I say on here is purely my opinion. And, consult with a medical professional, whether it's a therapist or, whatever. Do not ever take my opinion and my experiences as a way of directing you medically or as legal advice or anything like that. Like, this is purely my opinion. And I try to cover all my bases and give y'all smart ways of working with it. But remember, if you're, taking and putting a ton of stuff like life changing choices on what I'm saying here, that's on you. I warned you. And that's one of the biggest things with astrology that I have a pet peeve with is a lot of people, will, like I said, take it on as their full personality or live their life according to it. And it's a guideline. It's not set fate that one thing is going to happen, right? We have free will. The energies can definitely adjust and everything. And while I am highly trained as a herbalist and as an integrative well-being practitioner and stuff, I'm still not a medical practitioner. I am not a therapist. I am a spiritual advisor. And I think that that's something really important to address because, it can be taken in the wrong way. But along with, checking for medical warnings, etc. Um, Also, if you're planning to work with the elements, especially fire, or you're going swimming or something like that, be careful. Use common sense. You know, make all the proper preparations. Okay, soapbox done. So correspondences for March 10th. As far as colors, we're gonna want to wear or work with cool colors that remind us of the ocean. Perhaps blues, purples, violets, white, gray. Um, and I would also go in that direction as far as crystals. For me, hands down, I would recommend amethyst and aquamarine for working together on March 10th. And personally, I would use seashells a lot during Pisces season, as well as Pisces full moon later in summer, just because it brings in that element of the sea energy, right? Okay. I love aquamarine for many reasons. Probably because it's one of the birthstones of March. March is my birthday month. But it's also connected to the throat chakra and third eye chakras or energy centers. And it makes it great for communication as well as opening us up to spiritual downloads as it amplifies intellect, knowledge, enhancement of ideas, and the clarity of mind. These beautiful pale blue and light green varieties of beryl are a beryllium aluminum silicate based gemstone with traces of iron evident. And the name aquamarine derives from aqua, from Latin for the word water, and marine derives from marina, Latin for of the sea. So you know me, if you've talked to me much, I am a definite merfolk at heart, and anything sea oriented, I absolutely love. Plus, I am a full on Pisces, and I love my aquamarine birthstone. Then we have another one of my favorite stones, amethyst. You guessed it, yes, because it is purple. I love purple, and amethyst geodes have always been my favorite at history museums, rock shops, etc. Amethyst is a silica dioxide based gemstone in the quartz family. And something, a cool little fact about it is when it's superheated to around 1,040 degrees Fahrenheit or like 560 degrees Celsius, it will turn into the yellow gemstone known as citrine. Also, one of my favorite stones. Okay. What can I say? I have a bunch of favorites. And, you know, it may be because I've been a crystal lover and a rock hog for a while now. I love geology. Anyway, amethyst is a great gemstone for March 10th because it enhances meditation, opening and activating the crown chakra, which is our most spiritual energy center, right? Therefore, further opening us to those downloads from spirit. But it's also a very protective crystal, making it great for journey work as well. As far as incense or essential oils, I would definitely go with frankincense. And this would be wonderful to use with all the energies that are happening on March 10th, as well as any combination of loose herbs or essential oils such as mint, lavender, or chamomile. And I personally would probably throw in a bit of mugwort for good measure, further opening the third eye and the crown chakra. That's also one that you need to be very careful with, especially if you are pregnant or nursing or think you might be. So be careful with mugwort, y'all. As previously mentioned, on March 19th, we will be experiencing Ostara or the spring equinox, which just happens to be World Astrology Day, where we celebrate all things astrological related, since 1993. Little side note there. But throughout the morning of March 19th into the early afternoon, the moon will be passing through the last degrees of Cancer before it shifts into the sign of Leo at 3:33 p.m. Anyway, angel number right there. And you may start experiencing an increase of flow and feeling more vibrant as we pass through these energies. Then at 11:06 p.m., the sun will enter the sign of Aries, bringing even more energy, confidence, and enthusiasm. But be careful as you're being propelled forward, not to start being too pushy with friends or coworkers or partners or whatever. Okay, so moving forward, we have the full moon on March 25th at 3 a.m. And we're also entering eclipse season with Mercury retrograde right on its heels starting April 1st. And I'm finding with all of my research that this is no ordinary full moon or lunar eclipse for that matter. And the lunar eclipse is happening at 5 degrees of Libra. So it seems like the imbalances in our lives are really going to start revealing themselves strongly during this time. Typically, with all the energies that are already there around eclipses, especially this close to Mercury retrograde season, I usually encourage you to just coast right through it. Enjoy observing and absorbing the energies, especially just the natural phenomenon of it, right? But not to work too hard doing special workings at this time. However, with this particular full moon and lunar eclipse on March 25th, I highly suggest focusing on release work so that you can free up some energetic space, especially before moving into Taurus season. Then you can take time to pause and look at the big picture and start revising your plans for late spring during Mercury retrograde because things might be a little bit difficult as far as communication and stuff. So go ahead, do your release work, get it done so that you're not having any miscommunications or anything as Mercury retrograde gets started. And since Mercury retrograde is falling during Aries season, you'll probably feel this urge to just keep barreling forward. But it's going to be very important to find balance and practice pause during this period of time to avoid frustration. Communication, technology, they all may be rather difficult as we pass through the retrograde into April's energies this year. Honestly, there's been a lot of technological stuff already happening. Everybody knows as we start moving toward eclipse season and Mercury retrograde, things kind of start having a little haywire, issues. And that also reflects afterward as well. A lot of times, eclipses, the energies and things that we put into the world during this period of time can have effects up to 6 months later. So, as far as correspondences used during this Libra full moon with a lunar eclipse, I would go toward darker cool tones like blues and greens, black even, very deep, rich hues of these, right? And since we're going to be working on releasing and clearing space, selenite and black tourmaline would probably be my go-to crystals. So, as far as correspondences to use with the Libra full moon with the lunar eclipse, I would definitely go toward darker colors, darker cool tones, especially like navy and teal, hunter green, stuff like that, blended or, with black as well. You want to sort of adopt that whole vibe of the lunar eclipse because typically with full moons, I'm inviting you to be very vibrant and celebratory and stuff. Whereas with this, we're experiencing a lunar eclipse and we want to kind of turn inward, right? and adopting some of those darker colors can help us work with some of the inner things in our lives. And since we're working on releasing and clearing space, selenite for sure, and black tourmaline would probably be my go-to crystals for March 25th. I covered selenite in the February episode, but I think black tourmaline is new to us, and it's a heavy hitter for all of us spiritual and magical practitioners out there, making it perfect for this application as it's connected to the root chakra, our grounding foundational energy center, right? Which will help us feel into our bodies and find the imbalances where we need to improve and strengthen boundaries, right? It's also a very good crystal for clearing and protecting our energetic fields, making it excellent for amplifying intentions of releasing emotional baggage and promoting a more positive outlook moving forward. Tourmaline as a whole is a crystalline silicate mineral, not material. I guess it's a material, right? But anyway, it's a crystalline silicate mineral, and the black variety is called squirrel. I hope I pronounced that right. I'll double check that. But it's SCHORL, squirrel. And from all of my research and personal experiences, tourmaline can be very brittle, just like selenite, but it's like the opposite color. It is very, very dark, and it has a resinous like appearance to it. Rosemary would be my herb of choice for the March 25th full moon in Libra and lunar eclipse for its protective and clarifying properties. This fragrant evergreen herb has clarifying properties both energetically and for our physical body, while also serving to ground and boost our mood, bringing in regulating energies for our autonomic nervous system with the anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective properties that it holds. But that's all for now. The next episode will be part of the Igniting the Flame series featuring conversations with light bringers, change makers, and creatives. I hinted at it earlier, and I'm so excited to share with all of you the beautiful and inspiring spirit of Ricky Merrill Friedman, who is the founder of the Reiki by Ricky space in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where she has created a wonderful Reiki and learning space for all to enjoy. And oh, yeah, I totally forgot to cover anything about St. Patrick's Day, aka my birthday. But I have a lot of pet peeves about St. Patrick's Day, okay? And some of it is because it seems like everyone thinks that they're Irish and things are covered in shamrocks and beverages start to flow green for absolutely no reason. Anyway, it's been kind of a blessing and a curse to have a birthday on this holiday. And there's so much to unpack about St. Patrick's Day in general, because there's honestly some really quite harmful myths out there that are associated with this holiday. So if I get a chance, I might write a blog or post a musings episode about this topic. But right now, my month is rounding out to be rather busy. And due to having the flu in February, I wasn't able to prep a lot for March, especially with all the crazy energies flowing and being grounded on the couch for a while, dealing with both myself and my partner experiencing the flu. But we're all good now. But who knows? Maybe I'll do a live or run some kind of special giveaway for my birthday. Who knows? So if you're not already following me on social media, I highly recommend popping over there, smashing the follow button, because you know it's a whole thing. And of course, all the info will be in the show notes. Also, I'd love to hear feedback back. Also, I'd love to hear feedback from podcast listeners. I've been receiving messages directly through Facebook and Instagram, and I just love hearing how people are experiencing this. But it would be really awesome if you could drop me a review on Spotify or comment directly on the YouTube channel as well. Help boost the algorithm and such. Anyway, as always, if you have any questions or would like to learn how to work with me as a mentor while stepping onto your illuminated path, reach out and start a conversation or check out the many offerings that are currently available on my website, including the Patreon community, where there's a variety of levels where you can even work with me on a one-on-one basis, and you'll have access to even more educational inspiring content, glimpses behind the scenes, and of course it helps fuel ongoing production of content just like this podcast. So until next time, many blessings. And remember to stop, breathe, feel, create.